This is Duke University.
I think I'm going to go down the line from the far end, if that's all right, and introduce everyone and a little bit of their sort of biographical information. So, Natalie Bullock-Brown is in film and interactive media studies at St. Augustine's University, and is also an award-winning and Emmy-nominated producer and consultant and chair of the department. Professor Brown recently produced a 38-part DVD series documenting the 50th anniversary commemorative conference of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Professor Brown maintained a freelance career before joining St. Augustine's College. Do you say Augustine? Is that what you got? Augustine, okay, good. Providing production, research, and rights clearance consultation for clients, including trumpeter Wynton Marsalis, and Jazz at Lincoln Center filmmaker Ken Burns, and Florentine Films, media companies, Jazz Video Networks, and Dreamtime Entertainment, and award-winning filmmaker Judy Helfand. Prior to going freelance, Professor Brown served as a producer and correspondent for UNC-TV, North Carolina's statewide public television network. Professor Brown has also taught documentary filmmaking as an adjunct professor at St. Augustine's, production classes at North Carolina Central University, and has conducted workshops on archival film and photo research for the Center for Documentary Studies here at Duke. She holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Film Production from Howard University. Okay, it's Treva, correct?
Yes.
Did I get that right? Okay. Treva Lindsey is in Women and Gender Studies at The Ohio State University. Dr. Lindsey specializes in Black feminist theory, women's history, and popular cultural studies. She's published in and has forthcoming publications in Meridians, Feminism, Race and Transnationalism, Urban Education, Black Scholar, the Journal of Pan-African Studies, Souls, African and Black Diaspora, the Journal of African American Studies, and African American Review. She's the recipient of several awards and fellowships from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, Emory University, the National Women's Studies Association, and the Center for Arts and Humanities at the University of Missouri. Her first book, entitled Colored No More, New Negro Womanhood in the Nation's Capital, is forthcoming, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, great. From the University of Illinois Press. She's building a strong online presence through guest contributing to online forums such as HuffPost Live, The Feminist Wire, and the Left of Black series. Okay, and next to Joan Morgan, who is an American Studies PhD student at NYU and pioneering hip-hop journalist, author, and cultural critic. Ms. Morgan coined the term hip-hop feminism in 1999. Her book, When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, is used routinely in college coursework. Formerly an instructor in the creative writing program at the New School, a visiting instructor at Duke University, and a visiting research scholar at Vanderbilt, she was recently appointed to the advisory board of the hip-hop collection at Cornell University, which houses one of the most extensive hip-hop archives in the country. Her current research interests are Black American ethnicities, diaspora, transnationalism, cultural studies, and second-generation identity formations of Black Caribbean Americans. She's particularly interested in the historic and social conflation of the terms Black and African American, excisions of Black Caribbean ethnicity, and the erasures these conflations produce in African American scholarship and socio-political movements. And finally, I said finally. Great. I did you? I'm so sorry. I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry. Right, to the very end. My apologies. Okay, I need you to swizzle your tongue. Right, to Lisa Thompson, who's in African and African American Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Lisa Thompson is the author of the book Beyond the Black Lady, Sexuality and the New African American Middle Class, published in 2009. Her scholarship has appeared in Theatre Journal, Theatre Survey, Finding a Way Home, A Critical Assessment of Walter Mosley's Fiction, and From Bourgeois to Bougie, Black Middle Class Performances. She's the author of several plays, including Single Black Female, which has been produced throughout the US and Canada. Dr. Thompson is the recipient of fellowships and research support from Harvard University's W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research, the University of California's Office of the President, Michelle R. Klayman Institute for Gender Research, UCLA's Center for African American Studies, the 5 colleges, United University Professions, and Stanford University Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. And with that, I welcome all of you. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. But before you speak, I have a little symbolic gift for all of you, which is a little white hat. Okay. Who would like to start? Should we go in reverse order, and this time I'll actually get it correct? Would you like to go first, Natalie? Or not, that's fine. Can I ask you a question? Okay. So, the thing, I suppose, that has been troubling me about Scandal, and this is really the show that I know best of all. I've watched some Grey's Anatomy, all of Scandal, save last night's premiere on the other side of the hiatus, and none of Shonda Rhimes' new show. But, so if we could speak about Scandal. Okay. So I started watching it with a great deal of delight and sort of naughty relish, really. And at this point, I'm a little bit troubled and can't decide whether I should be liking the show anymore. And so the first question, which I could actually throw out to all four of you, is what precisely can we think about the relationship between Olivia Pope and her two white lovers? And how does this figure with the question of and of course we don't really know where this is going to go, right, because we're still not at the end of the show in its entirety, how this relates or connects to, you know, the father figure who is cast as a kind of demonic, right, evil doer, who in fact is really in control of everything. And so there's a part of me, the kind of anthropologist in me, who says, you know, is this in fact, I set out thinking, you know, Olivia Pope is this incredibly accomplished, agentive figure in Scandal who does and acts in the world. And now I'm of a mind that maybe she's also having her strings pulled, and in a way, to use old anthropological speak, is in fact being the woman who's exchanged between a series of powerful male brokers, political brokers, whatever you might want to call them. So I have this kind of ambivalence, I think, at this point. And I guess I could throw that question out to everybody. Yeah.
I actually think that Olivia Pope is much more empowered than we give her credit for. I think it's very easy for us to decide that she is being controlled. I think that, you know, it's also very easy to think about her in sort of traditional ways. I've read and thought about a lot, you know, the idea that she somehow represents the Jezebel figure, the Mammy figure, the Sapphire figure, and I don't think that those tropes work for her. I feel personally, I think that she has quite a bit of agency, that she is making decisions in a way that we're not used to seeing black women make decisions on television and even in movies. And so I think that she makes us a little uncomfortable because we see, potentially, we see ourselves and our friends in her and in the situations that are created for her on the show. And it's messy. You know, and it's not it's not what we traditionally see. So she is, I think the way that Shonda Rhimes is writing Olivia forces us to sort of contend with how we have thought about ourselves as women, how we've allowed ourselves to be thought about, and I think that we have to, in order to fully understand Olivia and even Annalise, we've got to walk away from tradition and these tropes that very much so limit who Black women are, and walk into the light and become 3D.
Yes.
So my current body of work is on articulating a politics of pleasure in Black feminist theory for Black women. And so I thought part of what your question, what was actually really interesting about you said actually preceded your question, as in wondering, should I like this?
Yeah.
Is it okay for me to like this? How should I be feeling about watching this as a Black woman watching the show? And so what I would like to say is that I think that we have a certain expectation of Black cultural products and the sort of labor they need to do. That they can't just be entertainment, that they have to show up and be this corrective for 400 plus years of racial and sexual oppression in the United States. And so because we have them so tightly tethered to a kind of liberation ethic, a sort of correcting ethic, that it becomes very difficult to show up to these shows and just have a good time. So my act of personal pleasure revolution is just watching Scandal very publicly on Twitter, and quite frankly, acting an ass. Like, girl, get the deed to the house to Vermont. Get the deed. That is, I always like that in real life. But it's also a refusal to conform to what I think is a particular expectation of an ethical practice that is imposed on Black women, that is not imposed on anybody else, that speaks directly to the expectation that a very sort of sexist and patriarchal expectation that we are the keepers of community, that actually goes beyond the politics of respectability, that if Black women experience this kind of public pleasure, the world is just going to fall apart. So I love Liv because she is messy, but I love her because she allows the viewers, Black female viewers, to experience affect, to have honest emotional reaction in community to these very messy situations. And I think that is important liberatory work that has to be reframed and cast that way. The other thing I wanted to say about your wonderful question is how we should feel about Liv's two white lovers. I think part of what Chandra does that's integral to a pleasure politic is allow us to revisit history through this lens of a active and deliberate imaginary space. So what is the narrative about us and desirability, right? Is that we're the least desirable figures in this country. And she has cast Kerry Washington to be the love interest of these two incredibly powerful, very sexy white men who traditionally we're supposed to be invisible to that type of man. And so I think that when you watch Scandal thinking about what does it mean when Tom says, actually is giving her this weird Helen of Troy speech and says, it's you, what is it about you? Like, you literally are the blonde Helen of Troy that crumbles nations, that she's about to seriously set like nations to war at this point. So what does it mean that Shonda, in this really beautiful, subversive way, has given this Black woman not something that I see as should we like her, but should we recognize this power for what it is? Is the power problematic? Yes, the power is always problematic. Right. What makes it more problematic when it's embodied in a Black woman's body? So my favorite line is, was from last night and actually the episode before, when she says she wants Vermont and she wants to dance in the sun.
Yeah.
Right.
I think also these points are actually excellent in terms of getting out of how we tend to think about that. I think we tend to come to representations of Black women with controlling images as our primary framework for engaging them. We are controlled by the controlling images. So the way in which we see Black women who are sexual will always be read as hypersexual, regardless of the fact that explicitly sexual and publicly sexual are not things we've really unpacked. If we see a Black woman nurturing or taking care, we collapse that into mamming. If we see her going off on someone, we collapse that into sapphire. And I think that we're so accustomed to do that because the Black female body has functioned as such a battleground for undoing and thinking about racial and sexual and gender oppression, that we often don't get to just think of Black women as a playground, as a place to play, as a place to enjoy, as a place to convene, as a place to commune. And we put an undue responsibility, I think, when we say, what do we want Scandal to be? And I was like, fun, sexy. I mean, the first season, I mean, there are some amazing kind of sex scenes, sex lines that are in this space that have a certain kind of dynamic around eroticizing Black female bodies that could absolutely be entrenched in problematic discourses and the historical baggage with which Black women travel, but there's also something incredibly just sexy about it, and being able to engage with other Black women in particular about what those scenes were, or having these very public Black girl moments, like, girl, why you sleeping without a scarf on, right, with all this hair, you know, noticing the difference when she's, last night particularly, when the hair started on fleek, you know, she was ready with this, and then, you know, as she's in this jail, as she's in this prison place, right, you know, she kind of just gets curlier and curlier, kinkier and kinkier, but the shellac was still on the nails. That worked out. But there was this way in which there are certain signifiers that are happening all of the time around Black womanhood, around our kind of Black cultural spaces, the spaces that we've cultivated. And there's a way that our intimacies are on display, but are still hidden transcripts, I think, even in the show. So there are ways in which I can read and see Liv, and she becomes legible to me as another Black girl. Right. And that messiness is not uncomfortable for me. That complicated sense of being and moving through the world. In the first season, when she's like, I don't want this really romantic, traditional notion of love. I don't want this. I want it messy and gray. I want it to hurt. I want it to be all of these things. And it made so many people uncomfortable because it's like, why would this woman not choose happiness? And we've privileged what happiness looks like. Right. We've over-determined what that will look like for Black women. We're countering that against narratives of 50% of Black women will never get married, right? So if she has these options to get married and be partnered in these very heteronormative particular ways, and she's choosing something else, we're uncomfortable. And I think that is some of Shonda's brilliant work in Annalise. I think it's some brilliant work she did around Private Practice, which is the show that often gets left out of the conversation when thinking about representations of Black women in ShondaLand, and of course Dr. Bailey on Grey's Anatomy, that we have to think about these very deliberate, complicated women that she's offering for us to think about. And I just want us to be able to be represented complexly and dimensionally, which I want us to be flawed because I'm flawed. That's right. And I want us to be making mistakes. I personally want two of the most powerful men in the world doing everything in their power to get at me. I'm not mad at that, who will come to wherever I am and rescue. I mean, there are certain things that we don't want to let go of because it would seem weak or dependent or other things, but it's also not honest about desire and not honest about what desire means, in particular for Black women. And that last line that really resonates that for me is when she says, I choose me, right? And what that means. And I think the show is a process of her choosing herself, that she's not always doing that work, but that work to create a space in which you're consistently choosing you, and choosing you may be choosing two lovers. Oh no.
So in entering this conversation this morning, I feel like my students who have their hand up for a long time, and then everybody goes and they go, they already said what I was going to say. So I'll try to enter in a different way. I often talk about ShondaLand's work from the point of view as a playwright and celebrating her casting choices. Because what she's been able to do for me is, because to me I think always about Miranda Bailey, because before there was Olivia Pope, there was Miranda Bailey, and she was not what Olivia Pope is. She represents the blurs, our people, the Black nerd, a sister, right? Who's not giving you the flawless outfit, and who's like in her lab and geeked out, and I love that. I think about Miranda Bailey within the kind of the history of blacks in television, and particularly in medical shows. So we begin with Denzel Washington and St. Elsewhere as the brilliant doctor who was perfect, impeccable in all his morals. And then, thank God for Eric LaSalle, comes along at ER, and he is brilliant and capable, but also a jackass. And I'm like, finally, we can be flawed in these ways. But I'm thinking also about the sexiness of some of the choices across generations. So you get to see a sexual storyline with Debbie Allen, which is fabulous in Grey's Anatomy. You get to see Audra McDonald, but a divine, I mean, that's amazing. And then I'm thinking, maybe I made a list of looking at the men and women of ShondaLand. So I'm going to shout out for the casting work she's done. Joe Morton, My Brother from Another Planet, who has landed in Scandal. Jesse Williams, moment of silence. And then a special shout out to my future husband, Billy Brown, aka Nate Leahy. How to get away. Nate nominee. So what she has delivered from ShondaLand is a place for me to sit and fantasize across generations, race, and sexuality. Does she do it all? No. Would I like to see perhaps her do some work with Black working class brothers and sisters? I think she would do that. That group would be amazing. She's not stepped into Black queer space yet. I can see what she would do with that in terms of Black desire and beauty but more importantly, what she has done opens space for future cultural workers to do that work. Because she doesn't have to do it all. I want it to be a plethora of Black cultural producers, and emphasize the word producers, because everybody wants to be talent that's in front of the camera. The real power is behind the camera and creating and making it happen. So this morning, I have a play that I'm producing in Austin tonight, and that part of making sure people, and talking to the actors and them being really happy because you're giving them opportunities to broaden the things that we're talking about. But until someone steps into that unglamorous spot, we're not going to really see those images, or many more of those images. So, but I am very thrilled with Olivia and the naughtiness of the show and the absurdity of the show, and including the other work, but also the way in which Grey's Anatomy is staying in the domestic and really staying in the kind of normal space. And they both work. And I just love the fact that she's, eating up Thursday night. It's hers. It's amazing.
So I'd like at some point for the four of you to have a conversation with each other, but maybe I could cast out another question, which is, and this strikes me from having watched some of Grey's Anatomy, which is wondering what theory of race is motivating Grey's Anatomy. Because I remember watching it in the very, very early days thinking, again, and this is a sort of reception question about, my response to it. Okay, so is this a prefiguration of an ideal world that doesn't exist yet? Is this aspirational? Is this descriptive? Is this, in fact, a racial theory that replicates what is out there? Or is this something that is attempting to push us, nudge us in the direction of another, better kind of, American society? And so I'm just wondering, what all four of you think about, again, what kind of racial theory is motivating the writing of Grey's Anatomy, or it could be any of her other shows? In no particular order.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, as the Californian, native Californian, that's the world I grew up in, many ways. So it's both aspirational for the nation, but it reflects the kind of world that was normal to me, being 7 years old, growing up in San Francisco, telling my mom, oh, look at these women next to us. Are they married? She goes, oh, yes, they're together. I'm like, okay, and pat the grapes, and it's not a big deal. And that's the world I grew up in. And then my friends were from Ecuador and Guatemala and from the Philippines, and they were, we were all equals in that way. So kind of it speaks to the kind of world that I think it does exist now in terms of running the country and what have you. That things have emerged in many ways too. And I was excited last night when like Donna Brazil tweeted a tweet up from ShondaLand. People were like, oh my God, one of our tweets. So that is kind of our universe now.
I mean, I think, so thinking about from the production side of things, when she does some of these shows, right, she does this kind of colorblind casting for some of these shows, which is very telling in terms of a talent perspective. If we think about a theory of race in terms of production, not necessarily what's being theorized within the show, but this idea of how do we get talented actors of color on primetime? And what happens when you imagine a show without thinking through who this character is going to be, and then you start to build in these narratives that are racialized around it. So when you're building in, you know, you add Callie Ramirez to the show, who's not initially in the cast, and the ways in which her identity as a Latina becomes defined ultimately has these interesting moments throughout the show, whether it's through her parents, her wealthy parents, right? There are ways it's challenging and pushing back against certain ideas that we have in this kind of national imaginary of race, but then there are all of these kind of cultural signifiers that start to come in eventually that unveil this. And so I think that having the production side of this, that is certainly something that's not aspirational. She's like, I'm going to live this in terms of, I want to create vehicles for actors of color to be present in our shows. But having a show like Scandal then is decidedly about a real black woman. I mean, that's the other thing I think we tend to forget. Judy Smith exists in real life. And saying, I want to do a show about this particular woman and how she relates. And Judy Smith, quite often in real life, is really dealing with powerful white men. Right? That's a power dynamic that is being thought about in terms of that. And then Viola Davis in her wonderful SAG speech this past weekend of saying, thank you, for creating this vehicle for a 49-year-old to write, which I'm a woman of a certain age in terms of Hollywood, being cast as a lead role, dark-skinned black woman who gets to be sexual, and she decided to say sexual and not hypersexual or explicitly sexual, just sexual, be the lead of a particular kind of television show. And I think those are the kinds of race politics I'd like to kind of map and unearth as we're thinking about the racial theories of the show, because the show, I still think all of them are trying to work out its own racial politics and trying to frame itself as something that is aspirational and diverse, but also trying to deal with certain kind of tensions that rightfully do emerge in a space in which the national imaginary hasn't caught up to that.
Well, I wanted to, the only thing I would add to what we said before is that she has made very distinct statements about her sort of race philosophies about the show. And they're different for each show. Yeah. So for Grey's Anatomy, the point was to cast colorblind. There was a commitment to go in there and just kind of be an alchemist and then go, okay, but then what happens when, like Miranda actually was written for a white blonde woman. That's who she sort of saw in her head. And when Chandra came in and read, she just killed it. And so then Bailey had to become something different. In Scandal, race plays a very different kind of role. One, because it's based on an actual black woman, but also because Kerry Washington was very clear that she would take the role, but not if the president was black, because of the allegory that people would make between the show and Barack Obama. So there is a deliberateness there. And so now that the president is white, so what does that mean? And I don't think, she actually really resents having to explain what the racial theories are behind the show. But she does say, if you watch the show, you'll be able to see exactly what it is that I'm trying to do. So it's not as if she runs, there's that great fight that Fitz and Liv have, and Liv throws out that pulls the Sally Hemings card, and he's like, you want to compare yourself to like Sally Hemings, who was a slave with no agency. Really, this is what's going on here, which was brilliant. Without Chandra then as the creator having to make that statement, she really lets the characters do the work. She's committed to making the characters and the writers do the work. So I think that she writes characters first and probably race secondary, and but she's also not oblivious to race in ways that would make the characters unrealistic.
The only thing that I can add to what these wonderful ladies have already said is, I just think that Shonda Rhimes in every single one of her shows, I mean, you could put hashtag POW behind so many moments, you know, when she's dealing, when race is being dealt with and not explicitly being dealt with. The Sally Hemings moment is a good example. I think the fact that the president in Scandal is white, and, you know, I just have to put this out there. I think that Olivia is, you know, the first black, potentially polyamorous character that we have seen, and I think that is major because it, you know, she is doing some very subversive work, I think, that on all kinds of levels, but certainly on a racial level that, you know, we are not, I think we will have to go maybe 5-10 years into the future before we look back and can say, oh wow, you know, this was happening, you know, in Scandal, and this was happening in How to Get Away with Murder, and I just think that the subtlety with which Shonda Rhimes is writing these characters and inserting commentary about race and sexuality and a myriad of other issues is brilliant, and I think that, you know, she just is masterful at what she's doing.
I know you want us to talk to each other. I want to talk to y'all about the fact that most of these black women in her shows, they don't have what we have, the homegirl.
The sisters.
And that's been tweeted several times, so I want to talk about what we feel, even Miranda doesn't have her sister girl's home slice, you know, the one that's going to be the ACT or OJ. You know, where we going, girl? You know, let's drive the van. So what do you think is going on with, what do you think is going on with that? There's no, I don't think anything can pinpoint any two black women, you know, characters or friends in her show.
I think, well, first of all, I wanted to just say that before we answer that I would not have been anywhere near as interested in this show if the president had been black. And I think the fact that the president is white and the most, I said this for a New York Times interview, and they said they deliberately cut it out. When they asked me, they interviewed me to find out why is it such a hit among African American women. And I said because she is being desired by what we think of as the most powerful man in the world, and he is a white male. If he was black, this show would not have the same resonance with African American women. It would not. It just simply would not. So the fact that, like, you know, so race is doing a very deliberate kind of work there. The fact that, like, Scott Foley's fine ass, like, wants her is important. Because, you know, what was the black guy? I can't even remember his name. Edison. Edison was perfectly fine. Absolutely do not care about that. So I just have to say that, you know, that race and desire is, like, really deliberate there, and it definitely plays into the reason that we're interested and we show up.
I mean, I've been angry about that storyline too.
And I think that response, I mean, Shonda's listening. That's an interesting part, but I think there's a dialogical relationship that happens here because that black male moment that, I mean, I think was just, it's still one of my favorite moments of the show when Joe Morton, Papa Pope, and Fitz are in the cell.
Yes.
And he's like, you are a boy. And I'm like, man. You know, your daddy's rich and your mom's rich. And it's just everything. I mean, he also has all the scenes of, like, you have to be twice as good, right? I am the hell and the high water. All of these things that, again, resonate in this kind of black parent moment and things that we experience that seem very real, but also that scene doing a lot of work in response to how a lot of different audiences are responding to the show as well. And I think that that's another way that white privilege is being questioned and interrogated. I think in these very nuanced ways, that scene being one of the more direct ones, but the ways in which power shapes this, and that we don't often think about, like, the erotics of power. Like, it is sexy, not just, I mean, Fitz and Jake, and I'm Team Jake, are sexy in a certain kind of way, but some of that is just power, right? What that that power is, and being able to have a language of desire that is framed around power, and that is Black women being so marginalized from these accesses to power in this institutional space, in this structural space, but then also in this intimate space that we're talking about. And I know I would be much less interested if it weren't that. But I'd also be interested in seeing, I think Liv is the easiest one to go to Lisa's question, to imagine not having friends. Her job by nature, I think, produces a certain context in which her upbringing, I can see.
The Black women are in her sphere at all.
No.
Even in the office.
No.
She's not, hi, no sister. I'm like, I need a job now.
You know, I don't know. This makes the most sense to me in terms of, but there's so many moments where I feel like we're her sister girls, like, girl, why are you going back? And you have these kind of sister friend reactions to the decisions that she's making. And part of the decisions I feel that she's making happen outside of that sister circle community that we tend to want to wrap her in, that she's decidedly put herself outside of. With Miranda, I mean, her commitment to surgery, I mean, she experiences the loss of family.
But she could mentor that young Black woman.
Yes.
Young Black women are in
But the other Black women who've been in the show have all been residents and attendings, right? There's only been that one Black woman in the newer season, right?
The last couple of years, this intern, it's been around. And, yeah, there's some possibilities.
Possibilities yes. And now the new daughter of the chief in Ellis Gray, who's
outside base.
Spoilers alert. That is on the show to see what kind of interesting dynamics there are. But there are ways in which all of the Black characters on Grays are these very exceptional figures in and of themselves, right? The chief, Shonda Rhimes, now Avery coming in.
I think Papa Pope is Olivia's girlfriend. I think he embodies a lot of that Black girl, talk back to you, tell you the truth, you know, that Olivia doesn't have outside of, you know, her workspace. And I guess Huck may be to a certain extent as well. So I think that's I'm blanking out, but that aesthetic, I guess, not aesthetic, but what Black women bring to the table when we are trying to consult our friends, you know, when we're trying to consult each other and say, girl, what are you doing? Like, I think Papa Pope does that to Olivia, especially, remember the scene when she goes at the dinner with him and she's thinking that she's going to have him assassinated, and he changes his seat. He gets up and changes his seat, and now he's out of the range of fire, and we're all like, what? No, he didn't, right? And I think he, in that moment, in that conversation, there are other conversations that they have where he is like, what are you, he is that voice that says, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? Why are you thinking that he's, you know, whatever? Are you actually thinking that Fitz is going to come and get you? Are you actually thinking that Jay can save you? Whatever Papa Pope's little rant is, I hear us in him. And I think that, you know, I think Shonda is inserting us in that way, at least in Scandal.
Plus, there are Black women who don't have a sister. Like, I mean, we don't know a ton of them in our lives, probably, but we all do know one where it's like, she ain't got no homegirls. Why does that look like that? You know what I mean? Like, we all have one.
They're all in this population. It's a little. I just think we should.
The women in ShondaLand.
It's very interesting. I mean, because you have female pages are very central. The relationship between Abby and Olivia, they're very tight. The relationship between Christina and Meredith, very tight. So girlfriends are a central part of ShondaLand. So there's a possibility for other kinds of girlfriend that I'm just not seeing and wondering why. And, you know, that's okay because we seem to have created in the Twitterverse, we tweet about it, and we're doing that work. That's missing, I think. But it's a very interesting, because friendships are, and the relationship with her and Olivia and Huck, and whatever's going on between Wesley and Elise.
That's my right.
All right, let me try and frame another question, and then afterwards we'll open up to the audience. I know that there's somebody in the back who already has a question. So, you know, we've hit the big ones, haven't we? Gender, sex, race. Why don't we do class, which is my obsession? And Lisa, I think you had said that this is in some ways an omission, and to think about, for example, Olivia's position in all of this and the way that she's been raised quite intentionally. It's architectural, it's designed that she's supposed to have this incredible upward mobility. And not having grown up in this country, but having come late to American television when I first arrived in the 80s, thinking back to some of the programs in the 70s that were precisely concerned with actually being stuck in place or class mobility from the perspective of the African American experience. What's going on here? Is this, in fact, that Shonda Rhimes, again, despite her best self, is actually a neoliberal type, and can't really acknowledge the place of class, or is this, about what kind of audience appeal, so what's going on here? Yeah.
I think it's American television in general.
Yes.
There's no one working class in television. We've been seeing white people work poor since Roseanne, I think. I mean, really.
Well, except the HBO series Wyatt, right? So
that was
yes,
definitely about
which
class.
is, it's a little box. It's so wonderful, but it got no awards. I mean, it's
Yes.
bizarre. Right? Best thing ever happened. But we don't want silly awards. We don't need that. But in terms of just generally, so I think she should not be have to carry the water for all of them, because right now it seems to be totally absent from the discourse around America. Everyone thinks the people in Friends can afford that apartment in New York, right? I mean, it's like, are you crazy? So I think that's a big, it's missing. And again, I think more important that she opens the space up for other folks to come in and do that kind of work. We can do better. She does what she does well, and let's let her do that. But maybe I'm letting her off too easily.
That's always an interesting question for me, because I don't really think people want to see it. When I think about, and I'm talking to black folk, I don't really think that you want to see working class black people on television and in film. Every single time we have one of those kind of projects, the self-proclaimed cultural critics start to go off even before they actually see the product that they're supposed to be critiquing, because there's an association of black working class with black pathology. And so I don't even know, as exceptional as The Wire was, if it was two black men writing it, that we would have ever seen that show. Okay? So I think that there has to be an honesty about what people actually have a stomach for, what they're willing to sit and engage with, created by and produced by black people. We are still very wedded to this idea of positive images and the kind of, again, labor black cultural products are supposed to do. And so I'm really wondering, would we have seen 3 successful shows from Shonda Rhimes, if she had made the first one about working class black people? I don't think so.
But we love Empire seems to be poised to do some interesting work around class, even though it's not working class folks. There's supposed to be class folks in there, because Portia getting the shoes definitely is Team Portia.
Cookie redneck.
Yes. So what that show is going to be able to do around class is going to be very interesting, but still glamour.
Okay, I saw a hand up. Oh, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think part of this is also this kind of aspirational watching. To think about what something like Scandal did in terms of fashion. I remember she had this particular Burberry custom coat. It was one of her most just fabulous coats, and she has a considerable amount of fabulous coats on the show and purses. And it crashed Neiman's and Bergdorf's website. Yeah. So immediately. Right? Immediately. Now you have a mind that said limited and all these things, but there's this way that you're seeing fashion, and particularly, the stylist tweets. You were talking about a cast that's active in a certain kind of way, which creates another universe where I say we're listening to each other in this dialogic dynamic, that a black woman becomes this kind of fashion space. And that kind of class aspiration to look like Liv, to exist like Liv, that also creates these kind of interesting class aspirations, that I still think that there's an aspirational dynamic to our watching practices, our scopic practices, that allows for us to think through possibility. And I love that Shonda's troubling that possibility by making it messy, that it doesn't look as lovely as you may think from that outside, that we're getting some level of interiority that challenges the kind of neatness of what we may imagine upper middle class to be.
And I think that, just to speak to that too, she's done something really interesting and unique with Scandal and the Gladiators, which is that there's really a really strong interaction between audience and cast members about anything. So I think twice, like, I've gotten tweets from Kerry Washington, one about where the quote came from. Like, she just tweeted me back and told me. And then the other one was from Huck. And I literally was like, oh my God! About, you know, nothing. Like, something like, I tweeted something like, we love you, Huckaboo. And like, I love you too, you know.
Serial killer that you
It's not everybody needs as a black woman needs to be falling in love with gays, but I think that, you know, that's also really smart. Grace did not have as active a tweet presence until Scandal, and so I think that she creates ways that people feel that they own these shows, but in the right kind of way. You know what I mean? Like, give me the space to do, and she will tweet back several times. She's tweeted back, this is my show, my writers write, you get to watch, don't tell me what to do with my plot. Like, she's very clear, we have some boundaries here. But it's a very different way of watching and engaging television that people respond to.
I just wanted to add really quickly, and dare I evoke this name, but The Cosby Show. I wonder if that show did not sort of, you know, well, absolutely, I think it did set a tone by doing something and dealing with, doing something too, and dealing with the Sanford and Sons and the
Good times.
Thank you. Good Times and
Jefferson.
Yeah, keep it going. So, you know, when Shonda Rhimes comes along, I think that, you know, there has not been a space where working class black people have been allowed on television in I think a mainstream way other than The Wire, and you guys have spoken to that, but I think it would have been interesting to see working class people in Grey's Anatomy, being main characters in Grey's Anatomy. And I think that a lot of that is about The Cosby Show. And I just got to give props and bow down to Brittany Cooper for her Claire Huxtable is Dead article in Crunk Feminist Collective, because I think that some of the points that she makes about the fact that in order for Annalise and Olivia and Mary Jane and all of these new characters that we have who are messy and are, you know, and aren't married and have all these things going on, you know, Claire, until we kind of put Claire over there for a moment, we are going to have these issues with these black female characters who we can't really seem to grapple with because we got Claire so much in the forefront of our minds. So I think The Cosby Show still is very much in the culture, even though it's, you know, we're not really talking about it in the same ways. Clearly it's not on anymore, but it still has a presence that I think, you know, you have to address.
Can I say something really quickly before we take questions? I do think that in Grey's Anatomy you have working class characters. Actually, you have quite a few. They're just not put in the bodies that you're expected to see.
Right.
So, you know, you don't, Sandra Oh's character, right, was affluent and with a Jewish stepfather, so you didn't get the sort of stereotype of the working class Asian American immigrant, right? So Karev is completely working class background, as was Izzy, as is his new girlfriend was homeless and lives in a car. You know, so she has them on often. They're just not in the bodies that we're used to. Avery is like a trust fund baby. We're not used to that. You know what I mean? So I think that she does have a wide class range represented there, just not in the way that we're used to seeing it on Grace. Yeah.
Shall we open it up? I know, do you want to ask your question? Because I know you had a long time ago.
Yeah, the question that I really had was when the conversation was around girlfriends, and and you made reference to Abby, which was what I was thinking. Thought it was interesting last night. And I apologize if no one if folks
Spoiler
didn't-
alert.
She was there last night with us.
I thought it was interesting that it is interesting to me that Abby doesn't. I mean, that Liv. That Abby sort of is that girlfriend, and when she was having the dream sequence last night about how to save herself, the instruction came from Abby. So in our everyday lives, I guess my question and what I see about scandal is, as an African American woman who, you know, I'm not in academia, so I'm not having these conversations about feminism, I'm just a mom out here living in the world. It is, what I have observed though, is that through scandal, scandal has become a vehicle through which Black women are able to, or it is helping me find a place of connection with my non-Black sisters. And I can very easily talk to my Black girlfriends and we can connect, but what I'm finding is there's connection that is organically happening with my non-Black girlfriends too. So, and I'm curious to know, and I see a hug happening over here, and what those components, why that is. And I had a friend who said to me some time ago, he asked me, do you see yourself as an African American, this was a white female friend, do you see yourself as African American first or as a woman first? And I said, I see myself as an African American first. And she was very bothered by that. And so I see that there's some bridge building, there's something happening with this show that I don't fully understand, because at least in my life it's happening very organically. But Abby is her girlfriend. And so that was the comment that I was making.
Great, thank you. I saw a hand up in the back also. Yep.
First, thank you, ladies. I'm a student at Central, so it was really nice to come on campus and listen to you ladies. But my question, we did talk a lot about scandal, but of course, most of us have watched How to Get Away with Murder, and one scene that I know kind of blew up Twitter like, before winter finale was when she took off her wig, and that everyone's like, it like resonated, especially with Black women, I guess. So with me, I couldn't understand that, and I didn't know if it was because it was like after her long day, I think she found out her husband was having an affair or something was, and she took off the wig. So I guess my question to you ladies is, how did you feel about that, and how did you take that moment when she took off her wig?
Okay, so the line that precedes it as she takes this off is, "Why is your penis on a dead girl's phone?" Right?
Yeah.
And it is the young Black woman who had just been killed is central to this. And there's this undoing that's happening in this moment, right? It's taking off a lot of things. It's the lashes, it's the wig, it's the makeup, and you're left with how it's lit to really show the contours of this beautiful dark-skinned Black woman with this very short prop natural who has, in certain ways, been devastated in this moment, and allowing for that moment to penetrate, because again, I think what Shonda does really well in certain moments is this affective work that I think we were talking about earlier, but also this interest in the interiority of Black women. And that thought and that pain, and that revealing and unmaking of all of the expectations that come with who she is, right? Annalise Keating is this acclaimed professor who has all this kind of power and is doing all these things and manipulating all these things and is complex, but she's vulnerable and she hurts in a very real way. And in order to do that, there's a way that she strips down for that very last moment that allows you to enter into that space of, and I think for connection for Black women, of these moments where we are often moving through a world where we feel that we're putting on. And so to have these moments where you can picture and envision stripping down and being able to confront your vulnerabilities in a particular kind of way, and having that being witnessed by millions of people to consider, to mull over. I mean, it's also a vulnerable moment, I think, for Shonda and the creative team that's behind that, to allow for that to happen. And a vulnerable moment as a Black actress, right? Like, having that moment. I mean, I love when Viola Davis doesn't have on the wig and it's on the red carpet. There's always this moment when she walks in with that. But on that show, in that moment, there's no glamour to it. There's no mask to it. There's no pretense about it. It is a lived and vulnerable moment, and I think one of the most honest moments in the Shondaverse, if we look across all of her shows for what that means.
What I would add to that is, well, first of all, I want to give a little TV credit to CeCe Pounder and the writers for Sons of Anarchy, because they did that first.
Yes.
You know, when she
Yes.
gets ready and decides, okay, I'm really going to have to deal with this gangster-ass bike crew. It's time for the wig. She goes in and she takes the wig off and she has her braids underneath. So in that moment, it is like, I need to get to my real core self to express what real power is. I can't win this trying to be somebody else. I have to be my most authentic self. But I also want to say, with Annalise, I also thought that moment was really equivalent to the moment when Barack is doing his campaign thing and he brushes the dirt off his shoulder. There's a thing that we always want to know as Black people, watching Black people who are accomplished and successful and in power. Okay, but are you really Black? Do you really know how this was played? And so it's that wink, wink sort of code speak to a Black audience that says, at my core, this is who I am. There's a lot about Annalise that could displace us, right? The white husband, the successful job. We don't see her girlfriends. We don't exactly know who this woman is. But in the moment that she takes off that wig, there is no question about who her Black female identity is. So I think for me, it was a kind of like that moment.
It reminded me of that great philosopher RuPaul, who said, "We are born naked, the rest is drag." And it really is about the artifice that, you know, as we all got ready for it, you know, I did not wake up this way. Really, there was a lot that had to happen. As older you get, the more time it takes. It starts to kind of being late. Okay, but I loved the vulnerability that she was on display. I agree with both Joan and Treva. I mean, it's amazing what Rhimes was able to do, and what I most I'm excited about with those kinds of scenes, and also with Viola Davis on the runway. It's not us, it's the young women and girls in my classes and those that are in high school that can look and hopefully see something beautiful that we have not seen. And I remember meeting Esther Roll many years ago and telling her, thank you for your hair. It meant so much to me. And of course, I wasn't born yet when that show was on, but really, it really is a lot of work that's being done when you have Black women performers who are willing to step out of that space and of artifice, of the drag, and show how we appear in the world.
There's also a subtle FU to that awful piece that is less classically beautiful. And I mean, to me, it's one of the moments that was just incredibly beautiful that we're seeing, and to read that, and it allowed us also to curate that moment because we're in the Twitterverse, like, and this is the moment where I think that Black Sister Circle and what the interpretive community that is created by how we watch this show, there's a curating of that moment for other folks who have never seen that kind of beauty by millions of people, and to witness that in a particular kind of way. And I feel I was engaging that moment, sharing that moment with my sister circles who I'm tweeting with, but I'm also, again, publicly sharing that moment as an affirmation of Black women's beauty, that I don't know what your classic is, but that right there was everything.
I saw Carla's hand up in the back.
I just love the way you've given me a way of thinking about this as a Bye Felicia moment. So this notion of, fathers having to destroy, sons having to destroy the father, or speaking back to a mother that was never messy, even though we have all of this heteronormative power around her. We have it here, but it's accomplished through messiness. And just this sense of being able to talk back. I wonder how intentional you think it is, or whether or not this is just a part of this historic moment that we are both archiving the past and saying bye, but also establishing a landscape that says this is work.
Yes.
Yeah, so I often hear a lot of, we should bring back, good black television, and talks about, people talking about the Cosby Show and different world. And I'm just wondering, what do you think it is that people are looking for that, Shonda's not giving us, maybe besides kind of some of the things that you mentioned kind of about these black women kind of like doing the things that they're expected to do, and whatever it is that we're looking for, like, should we be looking, for that to come back, or have we, are we beyond that at this point?
I think the thing that, like, to answer your question, that really helps is that black people are never happy. You have to remember that. Happy. It doesn't matter what we create. It doesn't matter what we put. Someone is going to say that is not the thing, because we have this notion that is a false notion about black homogeneity, black ethnicity, that black people are all homogeneous, that our likes and desires are all homogeneous, and they fit neatly into a very prescribed African American narrative. There's, like, demographically, that theory shot to shit. It really is in, like, 2000, where are we, 2015. So the idea of what do black people want to see could never ever be one particular thing. And so I just look at the noise at that moment, at that particular group that's not being represented in terms of their own desires. I do think that there is a faction that is particularly loud, and I find it to be black and male and attached to a particular patriarchal heteronormative norm. But just because they're the loudest doesn't mean that they are the majority in terms of their desires. So I think that, as an artist, because I was a writer long before I became a scholar, you write to create characters and to tell stories that you want to tell. You don't sit down necessarily with what is the black agenda and how do I create, work that conforms to that. You tell the stories that you want to tell. And I think we can either show up and like the work that the artists produce or not. But that's what I mean about black cultural products being expected to do a particular kind of corrective labor that entertainment is just not built to do. Or it frankly wouldn't be that entertaining.
And I just want to piggyback on what Joan said and to speak to what the lady in the back asked about if what Shonda Rhimes is doing is sort of, this is what I took from what you asked, is she sort of setting the tone for future work. I think that the way that she has imagined these different worlds that she has created, it opens up the possibilities for the rest of us to think about, and especially if we're artists, to think about the type of art that we're going to create in a different way. And so if there is something that we find lacking or missing, okay, now I can take that on if I want to, but I think that she opens up the space so that it's not just about, like, don't use the word, we don't look at the black agenda and then decide, okay, I'm going to create within that. I'm going to go outside of it, and Shonda has opened that door, and I can walk right through it and come up with, pretty much, I think, whatever I want to, what speaks to me, take pieces of what she's done, and then bring who I am, to the conversation.
I mean,
next week we'll have a really interesting opportunity. I think it's next week where Tuesday it's Being Mary Jane, Wednesday is Empire, and Thursday is ShondaLand. That's a pretty interesting moment to think about that. And all of those characters I know have been written about, critiqued, engaged in certain kinds of ways about what does this represent in terms of Black womanhood? What does this represent in terms of the Black community? And that onus and that responsibility is exhausting, and I'm not here for it. And some of it seems very directed at curtailing Black women's power and having non-normative representations of Black bodies and Black stories being central to discourse. That I think that pushback, I think we should question some of the intentionality of that kind of pushback, of what they're saying about Black women and stories that are messy, because we're like, Black life right now is messy. Black life right now is all kinds of things that are not good. So it's interesting that then the onus of how Black women are represented by other Black women or on these vehicles becomes the thing that's supposed to get us somewhere else. That is, and that's not to say that representation doesn't matter, because I think we're all here because we know it does. But what are we asking it to matter for? Are we asking it to matter for our pleasure? Are we asking it to matter to do a certain kind of labor around unmaking the historical baggage that Black bodies travel with, in particular that Black women travel with? Are we asking it to resolve certain intraracial conversations that are happening around hair and beauty and body? I mean, that's still a considerable amount of work to ask these shows to do without taking seriously that pleasure is its own form of Black joy and Black justice. To be able to have that, right? Our colleague Brittany Cooper often says, right, there's no justice without pleasure. And I think that the idea that next week there's a space for 3 days that I can delight in just Black women being on the screen is decidedly pleasurable, and I'm willing to think about what pleasure offers me in terms of joy and in terms of a making. That allows me to think that complexity is much more interesting, much more engaging, and much more politically possible. Like, it gives that kind of possibility to the development of something even more rich and even more dimensional.
I'm sorry. I wanted to respond to some of this, because I think that what has not been acknowledged enough is the kind of trauma and damage that the vitriol around certain critiques made by the community does to Black cultural producers and artists. And I think, as someone who's both a scholar and an artist, I mean, trying to keep which voice out of the room, the writer's room is a very sacred space, and it's very dangerous to let those voices in, but they do get in, and that's why many artists don't read reviews by reviewers, and why but now the world, you could shut that down and not read the New York Times and the LA Times and what have you, but it's different when your community is kind of doing this. And I remember from the Color Purple moment, to what's going on now with Selma. And I don't mean LBJ Library, I mean the Black community response, and looking at her box office numbers, it's a shame to me what's happened. And we have to really think about what's at risk, and having more of a sensitivity to those. Not that Black culture just should be treated more special than anyone else, but to really understand the kind of critiques and what kind of damage they can do to the stories you're not going to be able to read, to see, to music you're going to hear, because of all these kinds of sometimes you just call them what they are, sometimes attacks on Black cultural production that we need to kind of really be more sensitive to, I think.
So I saw two hands up. I'm aware of who they are. I'm just going to insert a comment, and you really don't have to respond to it, but it is something that's niggling at me, which is, it's the class question. I'm so sorry. And it has to, I agree that there has to be, oh good, okay. There has to be a space for pleasure, and one need not necessarily be writing to a script that addresses an agenda. However, thinking about the post-9/11 world, in which I think probably mostly in reality television, there has been a focus on a certain class segment, shall we say, much of it white, but not exclusively so. I'm thinking of the work of people like Hamilton Carroll, who talks about the post-9/11 moment as being a moment of affirmative reaction, in which a certain kind of white masculinity comes to the fore, especially in reality television, as a way of claiming a kind of patriotic, white, working-class masculinity, and how critical that is. I think the thing that I'm not hearing in this conversation is a connection or continuity with the moment, which is a moment different from the one that you're talking about, Treva, because you're talking about within the text of a given episode of a show, or within the writing of a television show in its entirety. And so I just put that out on the table. I mean, I do think there's something very particular and both troubling and interesting about the sort of circuiting around this question of class. And I think Leda wants to
I want to add on to it because
yeah.
it's a part of that. So a part of what I've been thinking about is somewhere where I exist between a liberation ethic, because I feel a particular calling from that, and also a pleasure politics. So like, I watch horrible black TV shows because sometimes I just have a desire to see black folks on TV, whether it's poorly produced and the script is bad and the acting is bad or whatever. Like I have days that I just binge on bad black TV shows because I'm tired of seeing all white casts. But then the other thing about the theories of race at play in the class, so the way we kind of talked about class, it's as if there's The Wire and then there's Olivia Pope. Yes. And there's not like me, like my father who is a construction worker and my mother who works for the state, right? So there's somewhere in between, you know, the street and the White House. So there's that. But then I'm also thinking about these studies that are coming out that say like the way in which the millennial generation has just a effed up sense of racial politics. And a part of what I feel like some of what we're taking pleasure in is a part of that politic that replicates the kind of skewed understanding of racial politics that millennials have, right? So that we exist in a world, maybe not post-racial, but I grew up with white friends, I grew up with Asian friends, so that's kind of like a relic from the past. So, you know, you people kind of, you're carrying on those issues, but they're not really there. And then while this is not a parallel in terms of popularity, but A Different World had every class. So we had Whitley, but we also had Dwayne from New York. We also had Ron, whose dad was a car dealer, but we also had Kim, whose daddy was a police officer. And so like we had a number of different representations. And truthfully, the show fell off when they started dealing with real issues, right? So when they started talking about AIDS, and when they started talking about issues when, you know, Kim's father got shot, or so all of these different things happened. But I guess I'm trying to figure out a part of this conversation that kind of deals with somewhere in between the liberation ethic and a pleasure politic. And then also, I mean, and this might be problematic because Columbus Short is problematic, but he's another relationship that didn't come up because he was one of the relationships with Olivia Pope that I enjoyed the most, because what I saw was a brotherly relationship, a relationship with a black man on screen that was not about sex, and he fiercely supported her. It's like, you need me, I'm gonna be there for you. So in some ways we talked about Daddy Pope's relationship to her. Her mom was just crazy. But in some ways there is something that I felt like Shonda was trying to create before Columbus Short just lost her mind. Was trying to create between the two of them on screen that I feel like we almost never see. A non-sexual, supportive black relationship, a heterosexual black relationship, non-sexual.
Well, you know, what's really interesting to me is that I don't think that what you are both seeming to ask for exists in ShondaLand, but I also think that ShondaLand can't do all that work. Right. But it's exactly what is happening in Being Mary Jane. Like that space between the White House, whether you think it's being done well or not is another question. Right. But Mara is doing that. That is exactly the space between black affluence and black working class, you know, coming from a black working class background, having a niece who is perpetually pregnant, and what that, you know, the shame and embarrassment about that, but still financially trying to support, is really that show. That family occupies multiple class spaces at the same time. And so I think that I'm not really one to, you know, ever suggest black folks in patience, because I think that like that gets prescribed to us a lot. But I also think that we do have this expectation that I just want to say how difficult it is to get to be Shonda. Like, we take for granted, like, Shonda just showed up. Shonda is like the labor of including Cosby, of so many people who had to come before her to kick through that door so that she could exist to occupy this completely phenomenal moment, an exceptional moment. So, what I always tell people, when they read something and say, I didn't do this, I go, great, write that. So, you know, if it doesn't exist, the people who actually want to do this kind of cultural production work, this is a space where I think, as you said, this is missing. This is where but this idea of we have to start coming, as Treva says, coming to the critique as if it's the battleground as opposed to the playground, by immediately starting with what is missing. As opposed to, wow, that does something really good. I can't wait till this space is is filled.
And I feel like that's such a part of our training, right? We come to stuff, I know in grad school, and like we rip it apart first, and then are like, it was like, okay, so can we start with what's useful about this? What may be here? What's the possibility in this? And get to the critique, because I'm here for that. I think I hear both of you, and I don't think I agree that ShondaLand doesn't necessarily do that, and I don't think ShondaLand is going to be a space where that's necessarily done.
Just to clarify, I'm not really asking about what's missing. What I'm really saying is, okay, given the thing that is present and is marked, what conditions of possibility exist that that thing is there? And that's a question about the moment.
What thing?
The way that we've been talking about Shonda Rhimes as doing a certain kind of work versus another kind of work, ignoring for a minute what's missing, what conditions of possibility make that work possible, that it becomes something that people are receptive to? And I think it has something to do with a much larger kind of cultural climate in the US, right? That's really the question I was asking, but we don't have to answer it
No,
now.
but I think it is interesting because I think you're fixing it to a very recent particular political and social moment that I think is actually long been the case in terms of what Black people want to see on television. So I think that part of what you said about just turning on the TV because I am a first generation immigrant. But I spent most of my growing up time here, and I still remember in the 70s when my parents would be watching something like the Newlywed Game and call us out to come and watch because there was a Black person on the television. What they would say particularly was like, "'Cause it's on TV." And like the whole building, right, Mark? Like the whole building was probably watching this particular moment. So the hunger to see ourselves validated on screen in some way or represented on screen is way pre like 9/11. I mean, like I think that it's very interesting in some ways the conversations about neoliberalism forget what a specific African American reality has been in this country in terms of not being represented and not being seen. So I think that people, you know, Good Times, Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, all spin-offs of Archie Bunker and All in the Family, quite frankly. That moment, those things are going to exist because we want to see ourselves. The reasons that you can, like, and you know, I am really not a fan of Black women on reality TV shows. I have like decided that in order to do the work, I have to pick 2 or 3 and just kind of like through them, and I'm constantly texting her like, oh my God, why do people even do, who gets pregnant for Peter Guns? Like that. Why do people keep having that trifling Negro's baby? Like that's my question. However, I think that like we are not responding to a particular post 9/11 moment or even this particular neoliberal in terms of our desires of what we want to see on television. I really do think that we are seeing more of ourselves now in some ways than we ever have on television, but that we are going to show up and watch because Black people are on the screen. At any particular time that Black people have been on the screen. I really do.
And the biggest shows, the best biggest 3 have been Empire, Blackish, and How to Get Away with Murder for this current season, and then you add Larry Wilmore's new show. So it's a very interesting moment for Blacks in television, I think. And I agree with Joan. I'm not sure we're talking about anything outside of the doors are opening, and maybe white folks are like, okay, we'll green light. No, we'll green light some of these shows. That's the real power. Is who not the cultural producer. Is who's green light the cultural producer to get that deal. Shonda does not own ABC. You know, let's be real clear.
All right, I see lots of hands. I know Mark was waiting. You have a question, right?
Yeah, so I've heard all of you talk on some level about entertainment and pleasure. But I know because of who you are, you ain't in this for the entertainment and the pleasure. And of course, we just all heard, right, from all of you that this is not just about entertainment and pleasure, right, that you're doing some real significant criticism and analysis. Talk a little bit about doing the work in an environment where Black opinion has been democratized. Everybody on Facebook thinks that they're trained cultural critics. That's what we do, right? We watch stuff and we simply talk about it, and we're not trained to look at it in particular ways and reference bodies of work that, you know, that aren't just about this moment of consumption. So talk a little bit about doing the work.
Well, I think it's similar to what we've been saying about the critiques and, as Lisa said, the attacks on cultural producers. I think that when I find, and I'm getting more and more to the point where I really don't care what people think about what I say, because it's my analysis and it's based on, you know, my lens. But I think, you know, because people have a lot of opinions and sometimes aren't informed, don't have that back history to understand in a more nuanced way what's really going on, they pounce. And it can be irritating, but at the same time, one of the things that I love about the democratization of these conversations, especially on Facebook, which is where I tend to dwell. I have not quite figured out Twitter, but I haven't figured it out all the way. But you know, I enjoy the dialogue. I enjoy the comments, and whether they are informed or not, they always cause me to think, you know, and to sometimes reconsider my position vis-a-vis the information that I've used to even come up with the analysis in the first place. So I think that, you know, I think it's important to have that dialogue, that back and forth, because I guess, you know, I'm a scholar, but to me, that scholarship means nothing if I can't, you know, take it to the streets, if I can't share it with my friends who have not gone to school, you know, don't have PhDs, and have a conversation where we can have a meeting of the minds, or at least understand what each other is saying, and I'm not, you know, talking over their heads. So,
you know, I think it's a really interesting question, Mark, and for me, as I actually really will fight to the death and nail to say that I am a cultural critic. I've been doing that for 20-something years, and did most of the body of my work outside of this moment of social media. I found it really interesting that in grad school, to write this dissertation, you know that I had to disappear off Facebook for 6 months. I do think that the democratization is often a lot of noise. I do think that if you are watching something and writing something and producing it the next day, that you haven't, that your think piece has not been thought about enough. I do think that we don't have a higher enough standard of Black cultural criticism that needs to be imposed and implied. I do think it's a problem in what is called the democratization of space, where people actually respond to the thread comments and not source material of the article that you did. So some of that is just bullshit. A lot of that is just bullshit. And in order to produce quality work, I feel as if it has to be shut out so that you can step back from it and think. The labor for me at this point is asking myself, if I'm going to be, if I want to talk about a politics of pleasure, how we're able to view Black women's cultural products and actually theorize pleasure and engage pleasure, what we need is a Black feminist cultural a practice for Black feminist cultural criticism. What does that look like? Because what that would require us to do is very different than the sort of like cultural criticism, deliberate quotation, that exists in this sort of democratization of social media space. I do think that the process of having editors is important. I do think the process of fact-checking is important. I think that they actually force you to grow. And so I feel like I was able to speak to an audience that I'm really concerned about, that was never intended originally to be just produced for an academic space. It actually is like it ended up in an academic space inadvertently, and that ended up being a cool thing without social media. And so I still engage it, but how much of it I will allow to impact the work, or how much of it I actually feel like I need to engage to do the work for me, is actually very, very small. I find it more disruptive in terms of my process of writing than I find it helpful at this point.
I've been going backwards, really, compared to Joan's career trajectory. I'm now part of the op-ed project at UT Austin that's, having academics become more voices in presenting op-eds nationally. So I'm trying to step out of the ivory tower. I have my two hats. One's a playwright, and that's one world, and then the scholar world, and comfortable in both of those. And then how do I now go out into the world to broader publics and trying to, talk about my ideas? And it's very scary to think, can I translate these ideas, this whole history we know, to a broader public? What's nice for journalism, I think, is that they have editors that do it for you, but academia, there is nobody to pay out of your own pocket that's going to do that kind of labor for you. So it's really made me a little braver. I did a piece for the Washington Post that came out yesterday about ShondaLand, and I was petrified. And I realized my editor, through the op-ed project, my mentor editor, Deborah Douglas, was just tells us all the time, the results, I guess, you can be inconsequential, but if you step into this public sphere, there's going to be consequences. And how do we kind of deal with the consequences of kind of intervening in this way? Especially when you do have the PhD, it has a certain kind of power that maybe is not justified either, right? Yes, people are, a lot of people with PhDs shouldn't be talking about certain things. Not their field, and they're just so, but I'm now a public intellectual, and I can hold forth on everything black, from Murray Kwame to, Oprah Winfrey's house. Santa Barbara, it's like, okay, so trying to, it's a new thing. I'm being very honest, it's hard to navigate, and I'm just trying to figure out how to do no harm, but also get your work out there, because a certain way, I think I've also, coming from a working class background, have really purposely kept the PhD part on the DL in my community, and realizing as I've gotten older, that's not doing my community a service, really, that there's certain kinds of ways I can push on conversations and put things out there that really will help move the dialogue further. But it's scary, because there's a lot of people coming at you from, our own colleagues to folks in the community, and I'll let you know how it works out. But I don't read the comments.
I just, on a simple statement, cultural criticism is a skill, and it takes rigor, and it takes a certain kind of engagement. And to have perspectives on things or opinions about things, I engage with people across the board, of course, that are talking about Scandal, right? Of the millions of people turning into Scandal, I'm sure some negligible percentage of those people are actually people with PhDs, because there's a negligible number of people in the world with PhDs, right? So I'm not even thinking that is the parameter, but when we're talking about what is the work that we then take to ground about analyses of what's happening on Scandal. Are we talking about form? Are we talking about genre? Are we talking about audience? Are we talking about reception? These are things that I think you have to engage with to say you're doing rigorous cultural criticism around particular texts. And everybody can have an opinion or perspectives. I look at something like, I love reading Lovey's recaps of different things that are happening in the Black world, right? Or seeing Issa Rae doing ratchet piece theater, commenting on songs or certain moments in the world of the wretched of the earth, right? I love these moments, which are really engaging, and things I can pick up and grab and gravitate towards that I think are really rich, right? And I think in a certain way, they're understanding an audience, they're doing a certain form project, they're doing a certain kind of cultural work. But what's happening is that you have a lot of people talking about film particular films, and they're not even engaged with the process of film or filmmaking or what narrative is and how one engages narrative, that people aren't attentive to genre. I mean, I'm thinking right now about how people have taken up Selma, for instance, and what kind of work Selma does, doesn't do, all of these kinds of critiques that still don't even take into consideration genre, don't take into consideration form, don't take into consideration what affective work is in terms of cultural production. And that, to me, is a misfire and actually sets the conversation backwards, that we now have to redefine, in fact, what, for me, is Black feminist cultural criticism. Right? We say Black feminist cultural criticism 2.0, that there has to be a reboot and a retooling to think about what media looks like right now and how we rigorously engage that. And I'm someone who's very comfortable with saying not everybody should do everything, and that there are lanes that we all have, and I feel like that those lanes get conflated, and it gets conflated really nasty around productions that are made by Black women and Black queer bodies, that everybody seems to think they can do cultural criticism around that and don't know shit about us. And I have a real problem with that in terms of setting the bar. Because it gets really sloppy and unrigorous when we get to Black women, when we get to Black queer folk, when we get to Black trans people. It gets really unrigorous. And I'm not here for that, because I believe we warrant rigorous critical consideration.
And I just want to say this because next year when I'm on the market, I probably won't ever be able to say it again. So I feel like my sister Esther Arma is with me in this room in her work about emotionality, and I feel that a lot of what comes off, in these think pieces or these comments by certain scholars, like a critique around Selma, is a real dishonesty about their own emotionality, about recognition and balance and validity. And doing the kind of work that you do that is only sort of witnessed by a very small amount of people. And then watching someone else come in and do work that you think is connected to what you do, and they get to go hang out with Oprah. And so part of the emotionality of that is jealousy. Part of the emotionality is that and then you're not owning it, and it comes out in this kind of sideways shit about but you didn't really deal with LBJ the right way. Nobody is reading your shit. That makes you upset, that makes you angry, and now you want to go and pounce all over Black women's cultural products because of it. Yes. Stop it. Yes. It is blatantly obvious to those of us who do this work, those of us who actually care about Ava, who support Ava, who have found ways to build alliances with this woman to support not just Selma, but because we recognize the importance of her work. You want to show up, she is completely open to scholars. You want to show up, there are ways to show up and do this work that are about building Black women up and their cultural products up and not ripping them apart. I won't be able to say that next year. Critical generosity. Like, we know Ava loves us. Right? You can tell that in what she does and the work that she does and has done in the body of work. So when I take someone who loves us, right, and we can sit here and have real rich debates about the things that are happening and not happening, what we want to see more on film and all of that, but when you don't take seriously that you have a cultural producer who's in conversation with you, who's on Twitter, who's engaging with us, doing a certain kind of work, and we foreclose that possibility by going to a space of attack, and going to a space that doesn't deal with the kind of labor that she's doing and the kind of labor we're doing and meeting there, then you're not approaching it with a critical generosity, which I think has to be a core ethical concern when we're grappling with Black women cultural productions and cultural producers.
Word.
And I think you had a question, did you not? Did you have your question?
I wanted to loop back to that conversation about class, because it's interesting, right? One of the things I was thinking about is, like, we see this, there's a trend. So, like, every 10 years, like, TV studio execs remember that Black folks watch TV, and then they put out new stuff.
Once a decade.
So, well, because I've been on break, and so I was watching on some random new TV channel, Rock, from the 1990s, which was a wonderful Black working class show. When Fox used Black people to build up its brand. Remember when all the Black shows were in Fox, right? And so we're acting like Empire's some new shit. And it's like, this your old shit, right? You like need to build your brand, that I was thinking about is when we say the question that you were asking about the moment. I'm trying to figure out why it's about 9/11 and not about the ways that the television industry uses black shows to build capital. Then when they do, they go mainstream. Then those shows fall off. Then they do this again. So, you know, like, if we thought about it in that longer trajectory, right, that we do see, like, we saw a profusion of black working class shows at the end of the 90s. They were whack. They got ghettoized onto those little CW, UPN, WB. Then those stations have gone mainstream, and now they're like, oh, we bring in black back again. And every time they do it, we're like, oh, we in. And it's like, well, we were in shit in 1998. We were in, you know, in 2005. Like, so I just wonder about, if we think about it in that broader trajectory, then what is the critique of the moment? Is it actually a critique about that there's something unique about this moment, or are we just back to cyclical blackness again?
Am I allowed to defend myself even though I'm not really on the panel?
No, I wasn't launching an attack.
No. I think I was misunderstood in terms of my time frame, which is, and again, this might have to do with my own trajectory arriving in the US in the mid to late 1980s. And really watching a lot of, you know, repeats, which is to say 70s shows, which to me seems starkly distinct from what's going on now. So when I cited the question of the post-9/11 moment, it's simply to say I'm thinking of one particular scholar who I think has made quite a compelling argument about the post-9/11 moment. But I'm not sequestering that as specifically the time frame that we're working in. I'm just saying it feels to me that something is distinct. And I warrant you, this is not mutually exclusive of the question of the cyclicality of television production, right? But, and this also has to do with my own, you know, interests in what's the era of post-Fordism like? What does it look like in all sorts of different aspects of life, including television, which is perhaps why I'm totally committed to The Wire and not to other things, right? So it explains things for me. That being said, yeah, you know what? I watch Scandal all the time because I love lovely things and I love lovely I'm wondering about that handbag with Daryl again. And so there is a pleasure principle at stake too, but it's just to say, I don't want this other thing to fall out, and I think that we do ourselves a disservice by not thinking very carefully about the political framing of our moment, right? Which has to do with all these other things as well. And this is me coming at this not as a media scholar, not as a cultural critic, but someone trained a very different way to think historically and sociologically about things. That's all. Yeah.
Just real quick about the power, though, to greenlight. We need to be thinking about who's owning studios, who's going to, because then you have control over post-production. So what's going to happen, and also the channels, right? Distribution. So what you know, it's like moving dope, right? Same thing, different kind of dope. And everybody's stuck on it, like same thing on it. But think about who owns the studios, which is
what Jay said.
Exactly.
That's what Jay's been saying for 15 years.
Right. It's the same. What are these channels? African American.
TV1, Centric.
So now that's what you're thinking about. Like how to have some kind of import some influence on those folks and who's creating these, who's going to put the shows on the air. Because think about how O started out. It was struggling, and she got black real quick, right? And then shows doing, she's doing real well now.
I wanted to thank you for clarifying or defending your comment. I thought it was really useful. One of the things that you inspired me to at least say and to make clear is the idea of pleasure as political. Pleasure as liberatory, pleasure as not just necessary and escape, but that I don't think black women actually center their pleasure anywhere near enough. I don't think black feminist theory centers black women's pleasure anywhere enough. And there is this sort of, not yours, but fear. Mark and I talk about this, of like, oh, well, okay, so all you black women are going to get pleasure and the community is now going to fall apart, or it's neoliberal and you're all going to be talking about what lipsticks you should buy. Like these are like some, or black women are thinking about, these black feminists are writing too much about pleasure when they should be thinking about structural racism. Like everybody has an agenda for what black women should be doing. What I am saying that black pleasure needs to be centered in a way where our agenda is determined by us, and we actually think about the political and in many ways, not just liberatory but revolutionary power of black women's pleasure, not just for black women, but for all the other groups that ride on our shoulders.
Yes. So we're sort of running out of time, but I did see, yes, my colleague in the back. Would you like to ask a question?
Well, we sort of moved away from it again, but to tap back for a second, I think some of the conversations that we were having both about the moment, whatever the moment is, right? And its cyclicality, the fact that every moment is connected to some other moment, not to be all historian about it. But also genre. Like one of the things that I think is really interesting about the way that Shonda has been able to become Shonda is that within these constraints, where TV works certain ways and genre works certain ways, that she takes a genre and she doesn't undo it. She opens up the possibilities within it, right? So like Grey's Anatomy, I was like, oh, it's ER on ABC. Oh, no, it's not. Or with Scandal, I have a friend who used to call the West Wing Touched by an Angel for Clinton liberals. I feel like in some ways Scandal is like LA Law or Dallas for Obama Democrats. Right? Like that is its moment, and that is probably kind of how she sold it. And then used that sort of shorthand understanding to switch around everybody's sense of what can happen on TV. And to be able to work within genres that seem very limited and don't have possibility and open them up seems to me amazing.
Can I just get a couple more questions, and then if you could respond in those last 5 minutes. So this person over here.
I just want to get back to Brittany's point on class. Just this lack of nuance in terms of the way black women are portrayed in terms of either their middle class or their working class. I grew up, my grandfather was a doctor, and he was 70 years old when I was born, so he was almost like my great-grandfather. I have precious childhood memories in his dentist's office, running around, just watching him work, and most of his patients were working-class black people. There was constant interaction. They lived directly next door to a family where the mom had died and the dad worked on the railroad. And so there was the older sister was taking care of the younger children, and my grandparents kind of watched out for them when he would be gone for like weeks at a time. And so they lived together, they relied on one another, socioeconomically. That's what I saw. I'm now a social worker, so I grew up with that, but yet I work with families who are deeply impoverished, and the worlds that I constantly, fluctuate between are very, nuanced, and I'm constantly defending Cookie to my peers because I'm like, what is wrong with her? This woman who fought her husband off of her son, like, she loves her children so much. She did a bid for her husband, like, what? That's so much love, and it's not just the Huxtables, and it's disappointing, how we're just so boxed in and not allowed to somehow navigate all the waters and have all these different, a lot of women are sitting in this room who grew up in working class families but now have PhDs, and so, it's just, we are exposed to so much, we're traveling more, and we are only allowed to have one kind of identity, and I just think it's so much more nuanced than that.
Carla, do you want to have the last say?
No, well, first of all, I want to tell Brittany, you have to hold this for our panel, so. Oh, yes, okay. I'm told to think of, I kept thinking of the post 9/11 moment, and prior, how coherent the images of Felicia or Florida, or, that was the name, wasn't it? Yeah. So those families were coherent in whatever situation we constructed them in. And maybe the difference now is this messiness and complexity. Cookie is you're gonna have to do a cookie symposium. Also known as the Rhimes and that's it. So maybe there's a way to think of this pre-moment as some sort of coherent production of blackness, and now there's a liberality in seeing what I think you have talked about is the messiness and complexity of Black women's lives is okay to be a subject. And that's a really, I'm going to have to think about that. Because I've wanted to be messy for a good long time.
Do all four of you want to briefly respond? Since we only have a couple more minutes.
I mean, I think that's beautiful. It's nuanced, it's balanced, it's messy. It's things that, like, I want to use some adjectives we haven't used before to think about these things. I want to think about new frameworks, new paradigms, new ways of accessing this. I want that, and I think that messiness gives us that possibility, that texturing, that contouring that we're doing. I'm really uninterested in trying my own work to get myself out of when I started with this like controlling images framework. I want to get out of these very, very particular ways that we always seem to engage Black women's cultural production. And in order to do that, I appreciate having Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday now to start doing some of that work. To do some of that work, but also to do some of that play. I am very committed to the play of this, and that we're creating space to play. We're creating space to play in ways that doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like. I'm here for the range that it offers, and I think sometimes we flatly read the range that is there. Between those shows, there's so much going on, right? And it's not, but people seem to focus on 3 unmarried Black women in messy relationships. And it's like that becomes the flat reading of it, and all of those women are very, very, very different characters. But our lenses have to expand in order to see the particularities of these racial, gendered, sexualized contexts in which these women exist.
So I would say 2 things. I'm really interested in listening to how Eddie Huang is going to respond about his new show, about the way that he grew up as he's a very colorful character, but he went into this very aware of the burden of representation, about representing an Asian American family where he is far from the idea of Eddie can be he can be like a straight thug when you're talking to him, so he'll start to talk like these are the chefs in New York that I straight wanted to punch in the neck. He's that dude. He comes from like a hip hop kind of space. Mindy Kaling, who, if you think we're having this conversation about Shonda and 3 shows, poor Mindy with the 1 show that she has and what she's seen as responsible in producing, and the very distinct critiques that have come out of from Indians explicitly, but the Asian American community at large about her work, and then doing this kind of comparative analysis to see that Shonda doesn't exist in a bubble that is exclusively about her Blackness or her femaleness, but about how other is represented in mainstream media. And the other thing that I'd like us to do while we're all having this fun, those of us who are concerned with Black feminist theory, is I'd like to, when we do this work, to actually go back and say, where are our theories a little sluggish? Mm-hmm. Does Audre Lorde's theory of the erotic really apply to Cookie? Can we use that to really explain the fullness of who she is? Where do we need to update controlling images in a world that functions in so much digital media, where you actually have more Black female cultural producers than ever before? That there are ways that we can go back and challenge the work that we consider, and not, I won't say challenge, but trouble it in ways that, in the work that we consider sacred in many ways that actually advance our conversation or our dialogue forward.
We're the same person, remember?
I just wanted to throw in, I as we were talking about class, I remembered, and I don't know how I could forget, LaDonna from Treme. Who is, she, I guess Bailey came first, but then there was LaDonna before Olivia. And I think LaDonna, I'm just going to end on her, I think that she bridges several worlds and is a complicated, sexual Black woman She just happens to be on HBO, so everybody can't access. You know, her presence and her reflection of who we are as Black women. And I wish Tremaine was still on. It was only on for 4 seasons. But I think that there's room, you know, there's the potential on cable that may not always exist on the networks for more varied representations of who we are. And as a cultural producer, you know, maybe that's where I'll go.
And my biggest hope is for there to be many more showrunners that, you know, I'm excited about Issa Rae's future in television. But also, I think there's a lot of things we didn't get a chance to even touch on in terms of Shonda Rhimes, and I hope that the next panel will be able to talk about. But what's been nice about it, even sitting last night, I tweeted about the moment between on ER between Jesse, Washington's character, and African-American man, Black man, and two Black men, one, you know, two moments actually. One where he was crying to his to the former chief of the hospital about his child, and then another Black man, and where she's allowed spaces to see Black men be vulnerable with each other. That is nice to see, and something. It's because it's a show. When Black woman puts out in the world, is mean only looking at and servicing the image of Black womanhood, is also servicing the image of Black manhood, and with me being the mother of a son, really important to me. Yeah. And Crazy Anatomy came out when he was born, so it's a very interesting thing about Shonda's career in relation to this child in my life.
I thank Lisa Thompson and Treva Lindsey and Joan Morgan and Natalie Bullock Brown for having led a wonderful panel. Thanks.